Hey everyone, this is Mark Cunningham, and welcome back to our talk show, our first one of the year, Over-Caffeinated. As always, we have the CEO of Beacon, Justin. Justin, thanks for joining us again, drinking his coffee. And we have a great guest today for you, actually our first author, which is an exciting thing for this show. But we have Tony Woodlief, who's the Executive Vice President at the State Policy Network, and also the author of a brand new book, I, Citizen, which is a blueprint from reclaiming American self-government. Which you can buy at places like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, probably spn.org is the best place to buy it. But we really appreciate you joining us, Tony.
Hey, thanks for having me, y'all.
Absolutely. So we're going to start with what we always start. I mean, it's over-caffeinated, so we want to talk about coffee. So Tony, you're the guest of honor. Tell us what you're drinking. What kind of coffee are you drinking this morning?
Well, my wife gets this coffee. She orders it from an Orthodox monastery in Washington State. And she read about them somewhere, and they kept winning all these coffee roasting competitions. And then the bishop there felt bad about that, so he stopped entering the competitions. But it's with monasteries, that's how they make their money. You know, they harvest something or grow something. So these guys do coffee. So we figured, well, you get a few extra points in heaven maybe, but the coffee's really good. It's powerful though. I mean, it packs a wallop.
That's good. Yeah, man, they can afford a lot of the whole thing could be a stained glass window with all the money they're making off of that coffee. So what's the name of the brand? Do you have it offhand?
Oh, you know what? I should have brought it up with me. It's down by the coffee maker.
Well, yeah, because now I want to try it. So I'm going to have to email you afterward and try to get that name.
I think he just doesn't want us to know.
Yeah.
Great. You know, it's the more the better. You know, they can go platinum or whatever it is, whatever the coffee awards are. I don't know, but
there you go. I like the idea that it's so good that we just don't want to make other people feel bad because we want to be Christian about it. So Justin, what are you drinking this morning?
So I'm drinking, I think this is like a second time I've had this on the show, Cuban Coffee Queen. So when we were in Key West, there's like a food truck, coffee truck, and they just have some of the best coffee. And then we were able to start getting it shipped to our house. So that's what I'm drinking now. It's delicious.
Now, what makes the Cuban coffee? I know there's like a drink called a Cuban, but like, is it made in Cuba? Actually?
Really, I mean, I guess it's the type of beans and the way they roast it, but it's really strong coffee as well. Because Cuban coffee is really strong. The way
you take 2 or 3 of them, you can't sleep for 2 days, but that is good. And I'm just sticking with just Starbucks today. Can't go wrong. Just a solid thing.
They still have the Christmas Starbucks.
They still do, yeah. They still have the things, but they have their Christmas drinks. They don't have as many options, but it feels wrong drinking after Christmas anyway. So, so we appreciate. Let's get into this. So one of the huge news stories of the entire, last week, it probably took up the news, that the Chicago Teachers Union has decided to stop teaching, I guess. So they all voted, and 77% of the union said that we're not going in because of some, I don't even understand what they were asking for, some extra health and safety, I guess, testing, but every other public school in the country is fine with it. So they voted to not teach. The Chicago Public Schools wants them to teach. The Democratic president wants them to teach, and the mayor of Chicago wants them to teach. So tell me about this. Tony, we'll start with you. What do you take away from this? I mean, are they so disconnected with America right now that it's hard to understand where they're coming from with this? What do you think their kind of impetus is behind not teaching?
Well, I mean, obviously I can't read their minds or see in their hearts, but I think we certainly have whipped people at the extremes, in particular, up into a frenzy over COVID. So you've got the folks on the most extreme left who are convinced that it's worse than the bubonic plague. And then you've got folks, unfortunately, on the extreme right who are convinced that it's all a hoax or whatever. And then the rest of us are here in the middle. So the tragedy in Chicago is you've got, last I saw, over 80% of third graders aren't up to state standards on reading and math. You've had 12 children who've unfortunately died of COVID in Chicago since the pandemic started. But you've had 228 young people killed in homicides in that city. And the reality is, when they're not in school, a lot of these older kids, they're out on the streets, their parents are working. It's not safe. And you've seen Cook County over 1,000 murders for the first time since the 1990s. But the underlying reality is what we shouldn't lose sight of, and this is what frustrates me with some of my Republican friends. We see all these schools closing over the past year, and people are understandably upset. There is an opportunity to really advance school reform and school choice, because the truth is Chicago schools were already failing. Right? In non-pandemic years, over 60% of the kids weren't up to standards in reading and math. So it's worse now, but it was terrible. It was embarrassing before. So it would be nice if we could see some, opportunities to get these kids into educational environments that actually work for them while there's still time for them.
And Justin, you just wrote a blog post about this last week. So, I mean, tell us kind of, I mean, obviously you agree with Tony in a lot of ways. Tell us about what you think the solution is here.
Yeah, I think schools and education, that's the new front lines of the pandemic. Early on in the pandemic, when we had lockdowns, it was how do small businesses survive? And this is really the same idea that those who are imposing these stringent lockdowns, in this case, school closures, believe that we can just turn on and off the economy like a light switch and everything will be okay. And there are severe consequences to that, just like you can't turn off a child's brain like a light switch. If that child is not in school learning, they are losing precious years that they will never get back. If you don't learn to read by third grade, your chances of success are minimal. And so this idea that, it's just safe for everybody, let the kids stay home for a year, now 2 years, going on 3 school years, something's got to give. And I think parents are finally fed up and are tired of this. They gave a lot of grace early on, but now they are fed up because it's no longer about what's best for their kids. It's about what's best for the adults. And it's really not even what's best for the adults in terms of safety. They're trying to extract all other kinds of stuff out of this. And that's why the unions are in the driver's seat, right? And so ultimately, I think that the solution to this is empower parents with more choice. Let them vote with their feet out of those schools if those schools refuse to be open.
And I think Tony made a good point too, because when he said it's the fringe of both parties, right? I know that teachers shouldn't hypothetically be the fringe, but the mainstream Democratic Party wants them to go back to school. This is not a normal Democratic idea. It is really just the fringe that just happens to be, pretty high up and more well-respected than maybe they should be.
When Mayor Lightfoot is attacking the teachers unions on this, something's wrong, right? That this is not a normal situation.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's a good segue here, and I think it actually goes a lot with what your book talks about too, Tony, which we'll talk about later. But one of the things that we have seen, and we've seen a movement of Hispanic people kind of from the Democratic Party to the middle and kind of halfway through the Republican Party. Now, we have to be careful how we talk about Hispanic, because I mean, there's Cuban, Puerto Rican, there's a lot of different sects of Hispanic, so it's not always super useful do him as a broad brush, but it's been noticeable that, 62% voted for Joe Biden. And they said if Biden and Trump ran again, it'd be 37% to 37% for the Wall Street Journal. Just congressional Democrats, they said 37% Democrat, 37% Republican. That's normally about a 70% thing. So what is the reason, in your opinion, that I don't know that the Democrats are moving or the Hispanics are moving towards the Republican Party, but they seem to be moving away from the Democratic Party. So Tony, why do you think that's happening?
Well, so some on the left, they want to classify this as a kind of a macho machismo thing, and they speculate, Donald Trump appeals to that in Hispanic men, and I think that's facile at best. It's racist at worst. Other people will say it's religion. Catholics are majority of Hispanics in America are Catholic, but the best polling indicates that Hispanics support abortion at the same rate as non-Hispanic whites. It's actually Hispanic evangelicals that are more pro-life than Hispanic Catholics. So I don't think religion explains it, but here's what I think does explain a lot of this. Back in 2018, Hispanics were 18% of the US population. They were 25% of all new business startups. Immigrants overall were responsible for 30% of new business startups in America. Meanwhile, of all children in America, 18 and under, 1/4 of them are Hispanic. So what Hispanics in the US have gotten from the left in recent years is Latinx, whatever that means, open borders, which suppress wages, right? COVID lockdowns that destroyed small businesses, and then virtual schooling, which is a joke, which has been especially hard on 2-income families and lower income families. So I think you just see that the hard left is doing things that threaten the very things that many Hispanics came to this country seeking, and they don't like it.
Now, Justin, do you think this is kind of a long-term trend, or do you think it's asserted right at this moment because the Democrats are so bad, or do you think this is actually going to be a term that continues to go after this?
It can be long-term if Republicans wise up, and if those on the right wise up and realize that they have the opportunity to be that big tent that they claim that they want to be, right? And so embrace things like school choice so that those families have access to a quality education. Quit giving handouts and bailouts to big businesses at the expense of the small businesses who are struggling to survive. If you really embrace those free market principles that we believe in as a Republican Party, as a conservative, right of center movement, then you are going to get them full time, because you're giving those people economic freedom and economic opportunity that they're not getting from the left that they've historically voted for. So it really is up to, I think, to Republicans and conservatives to determine whether they're willing to provide the types of policies that Hispanics are seeking.
And potentially for Democrats to also say, hey, we're losing these people. Why are we losing them? It's like, we want to try to get them back. And maybe, going to the far left turn doesn't do it.
Right.
Also, Justin, I'm not sure anybody's ever been more prepared than you, but Tony's rolling off numbers. He's got percentages. I mean, this is an impressive showing right now.
Well, I've heard
a whole book about this stuff, right? So you better be good about it.
On my coffee, I'm ready. I didn't want to look down.
Yeah, that monastery is what set you up. So let's talk about kind of more of a fun topic, but I saw a recent U.S. News and World Report study put Boulder, Colorado as the #1 place to live in the U.S. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but there's a lot of other interesting factors that Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga all made the top 50 from Tennessee, which is pretty impressive. So my question is, if you could pick one place to live that you don't currently live, where would it be? And also, if you picked one city you'd never want to live in, that you absolutely would basically pay money not to live in, what city would that be? So we'll start with you on this one, Justin. What's the city that you would you could live anywhere in the country? #1 city
in the U.S.
In the U.S. Yeah. Sorry.
Man, that is tough. Well, if it was in Tennessee, I've always said that I would live in Chattanooga and not Nashville. Bought a home in Chattanooga, have an Airbnb there. We get to go spend some time there occasionally. So I guess that is my second home. But probably somewhere in Colorado. Yeah, like I don't know about Boulder per se, but that area around the mountains. Love outdoors, love hiking. I would be gravitated towards somewhere like that. Where would I not want to live? No knock on Stephanie because she's from here, but I just can't stand Cleveland, Ohio.
Really just all of Ohio though, right? Not just Cleveland.
For the most part, yeah. Cincinnati's okay to visit, but yeah, Cleveland in particular is just not my thing.
Okay, so now that we trashed all of Ohio, Tony, where would you want to live? You can live anywhere in the country.
I'm glad my wife isn't here because she's from Akron, and I have a similar.
Oh, wow.
In northern Ohio, it's parts of it are depressing. First of all, that study, I looked into it. They only include the 150 biggest metro areas in the U.S., which means like Lexington, Virginia, or Enid, Oklahoma. They don't even have a chance, and these are great little towns. I try to be content wherever I am. If it's got like a good diner and it's safe and nobody's telling you their pronouns, I feel pretty good.
That's why Boulder wouldn't be cool, right? There's all the pronoun stuff.
Pronouns with anybody unless it's a grammar class. But I've always been partial to Wichita, Kansas. I lived there 2 times in my career, and it's just it's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful city. And in terms of where I would literally pay cash money to not live, well, Washington D.C. Right? I've lived there, and believe me, don't ever want to go back.
I will agree with that. I'll take D.C. too. And also, you were a shocker, right? You went to Wichita State for school at some point.
That's right. I got a Master of Fine Arts of all things. So that's right. Yeah. Go Shockers.
There you go. That's right. Charles Koch Arena, right? That's what it was called. So let's go there. I mean, I'm glad that we could trash Ohio a little bit. That's always good in the show. So speaking of Ohio, we'll talk about the NFL playoffs, and a team from Ohio, the Cincinnati Bengals, have a real chance, I think, this year, which is kind of the cool surprise story of the year, going from the #1 overall pick to winning their division and making the playoffs. I'm interested. I know that you guys both like football. You're both football fans. What is your Super Bowl matchup? Who do you think makes the Super Bowl? So we'll start with you on this one, Justin. So AFC and NFC, I know, and then obviously the Titans also have the 1 seed in the AFC.
Yeah. Although it's gonna, we got a tough. We got home field advantage.
The Chiefs are still the favorite to come out of the AFC, though, despite that.
Yeah, but I think we still have a tough road ahead, even with Derrick Henry coming back. Man, I really don't know on the AFC side. I think that the Pack will make it on the NFC side. I'm probably going to go Packers Chiefs.
Okay. That is the chalk thing. Also, when did Aaron Rodgers become bearable? He used to be so awful. Now I kind of like the guy. I can't believe it.
Really? I think the opposite.
He's actually saying something I think is interesting and like really kind of challenging some of these things that are kind of the cancel culture stuff.
Yeah, that is true. But I mean, he got dragged through the mud for that because of the vaccine stuff. But I feel like he's turning into like a hipster Matthew McConaughey.
He's like Joe Rogan. Him and Joe Rogan are friends, so I think he's gotten a lot of that from him. So Tony, what about you? Are you going chalk too? Do you think Packers Chiefs?
Well, so you look on the NFC side, and I was an old school like Danny White fan. Okay, so I have to always pull for the Cowboys, if only because they're the arch enemies of the Redskins or whatever we call them now. It's channeling my animosity towards DC. If you look at Dallas, they're like number one in defense, especially like defense adjusted value over average. Like you want to get statistics. Then you got Tampa Bay, they're number one in offense, right? Not so bad in defense. And you got Green Bay, pretty good offense, but they got a coach who seems to spread injuries around like typhoid Mary. So I'm thinking you're going to have a Tampa Bay Green Bay shootout in the playoffs, but you're going to get Dallas edging Brady this time, going to the championship. And then on the weaker AFC side, you got the Bills, right? They're the only team holding their opponents below 300 yards per game. They're top 5 on offense. I mean, but they've got a young quarterback. He's not won anything but the Idaho Potato Bowl. So
it's State.
But what I'm predicting is the Bills are going to come out of that. And you're going to have a rematch of Dallas Buffalo, that 93-94 rivalry, and pretty much the same outcome.
Hey, so the Braves won the World Series for the first time since 95 this year. So maybe this is like a mid 90s, return to sports here.
Well, I'm going with Bengals and Rams. I can't see Tampa Bay doing anything with their out. They don't have the receivers. Godwin's out. Antonio Brown has gone on the deep end. I mean, they don't have any offense at this point. So, and the Packers always seem to choke when it matters most. You can tell Rodgers, for all how great he's been, has only won one championship. I agree that the AFC seems like the toss-up. The Titans could win. I mean, it's really, really wide open. So we'll have to see who's right. We'll come back and we'll see who won this pool, and we'll send coffee to Tony if you get that correct.
And if I win, I want some of that Monastery coffee.
Oh, I'm sending it.
There we go. Perfect. So in recent news, I started watching this show, Impractical Jokers. Have either of you ever seen this show?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. It's really funny. It's like they basically force their friends to do horrible things in front of other people. And it's just a group of friends. But I just started watching, and I found out yesterday Joe Gatto, who's like he's probably the star of that show, has left the show. He said, I'm stepping away. And it's really disappointing because I just got into this show. So my question is, what show did you all love? It could be fictional, it can be reality, whatever, where either a character was killed off or the person who made the show just decided to leave. I mean, there's a lot of examples. If you watch the OC, Misha Barton left. I don't know if that was, I don't know if you guys are OC fans, but it was a big deal for me when I was 17. But what is a show that you feel like you were so disappointed when somebody left? I know a bunch of people died in that show that you like, Justin, Game of Thrones. So I don't know if there's something like that.
That was probably going to be mine. And it wasn't a specific person, but like every week somebody like a big died. And it was just always like, who's going to die this week? That became a whole like thing about the show. So I think it would be that. Because
was there somebody who died who you actually felt you're like, man, I'm going to miss that person in the show?
I mean, every week there was somebody like, man, I wish that person would have died. You wanted other people to die who were like, they deserved it, but they never died. They, lived forever. But I think that's kind of a mantra.
Yeah. Okay. So what about you, Tony? Any shows that somebody died or somebody was off the show that you're like, oh man, that's a shame?
Well, so you mentioned Atlanta. That always makes me think of TBS. And so when I was a kid, I grew up on Andy Griffith's show reruns. And I can just tell you that there were two kinds of Andy Griffith show. There was the one with Don Knotts, right? Barney Fife. There were ones without him. And night and day. So I will always mourn Don Knotts not spending more time with Andy Griffith, which all came down to some bureaucratic mix-up, bad signals sent. And that's why Don Knotts went off to his, movie career, such as it was. But great tragedy for art when Don Knotts and Andy Griffith parted ways. Don
Knotts was the guy from Three's Company, right?
Yeah, see, then right.
Okay, well, he was good in that. I think he's funny from that anyway.
Yeah, he was at the height of his powers as Barney Fife, and there's so much more comedy to explore, and we didn't get it. There we go.
Well, we reached a lot of different generations with this one. We went back to old for you, but some newer ones for both of us. That's good. So, but a lot of people are starting off the new year trying to be more positive, things like that. We're going to kind of go the opposite way on this, and we're going to ask you, we kind of have a this or that, where we basically give you two choices and you pick which one you choose. And this one's going to be an idea of what's more annoying. So it's going to be which one you dislike more. So the first one is losing your remote or losing your car keys. Which one is more annoying? Just, we'll start with you.
Well, losing the car keys because you're always trying to get somewhere, right? So like you're in a rush and you've lost them and you don't know what to do. So it's not like you look for your car keys randomly throughout the day.
But what if you're trying to watch a game and you're trying to get it on and you can't find the remote because it's not like it used to be where you can kind of hit the side of the TV.
Yeah,
So
that's true. I
that's a
guess
chore.
I don't lose my remote a lot.
I lose
my
it
car
3
keys more
times a
often
day.
than I
So.
lose my remote.
Okay, so you're just more responsible than me. So what about you, Tony? Which one is more annoying to you?
I'm going to go remote, and here's why. When I need my truck keys, odds are I have to go somewhere I don't want to go. So I'm fine if I have an excuse to be delayed or not go at all. But when it comes to watching TV, I have, by the time we get all the kids down and everything's settled and cleaned up, I have roughly a 17-minute window between when we can turn on the TV and when my wife will fall asleep. And I have to get off of whatever show because she doesn't want me to watch it without her. So those are precious minutes. I'm digging around in the couch cushions looking for the remote.
Yeah, that 3 minutes you cannot afford. I mean, that's 1/5 of your time that you're watching TV.
Like a third of Game of Thrones right there.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so what's more annoying?
Dead already.
Ordering food and getting it cold, or ordering a drink, beer, coffee, whatever, and getting that warm. Not coffee. That doesn't make any sense. But just say beer and getting it warm.
I mean, I tend to drink scotch, so I can, it doesn't have to be cold. So I'm going to go with food. I hate when my food arrives late and cold, like on Uber Eats or Postmates.
Okay, what about you, Tony?
I'm the same way. If it's cold, then I have like hygiene concerns. But if it's a warm beer, I can adapt.
Okay. So what's more annoying, someone who chews really loud or someone who snores? And if either your wives are watching, I don't know if we're gonna have to talk about that. But Justin, what about you? Which one do you think?
Choose. I have that whatever the hearing issue is, where like it really like small noises drive me crazy, and so like I can't eat with somebody in silence because I can hear them chewing, and I want to punch them.
Okay, what about you, Tony?
I'm not going to touch that. For me, it's snoring. My wife, of course, never snores except when she's pregnant or has a cold. And those are times when I need to put a pillow either over her head or mine because in my sleep, I get
it's hard to believe how much you can hate somebody you love when they're snoring. And it's just, you're like, wow, I've never hated somebody so much in my life. But then you're like, I know I love you. I got to stop. It's fine.
Mark just got married, by the way.
Yeah, just got married. That's right. So, and same thing. She always snores that she has a cold, thankfully. But okay. And then the last one is going to be we're going to hammer libertarians on this, but who's more annoying? Somebody who talks about Peloton all the time or somebody who talks about Bitcoin all the time? Which one do you think is more annoying? Tony, we'll start with you on this one. Which one are you going with?
There are two things that make me fall asleep, whether it's a tweet or a monograph or an essay or just someone talking about it, and that's Bitcoin and Aristotle. So Peloton, at least there's some athletic something going on. I could stay interested, but Bitcoin, I just fall right asleep.
Okay, what about you, Justin?
Same. I feel like people that talk about Peloton all the time, it's sort of that New Year's Eve or New Year's resolution where it comes in waves and then kind of goes away. That's not the case with it. People who are obsessed with crypto are like full bore. And
people obsessed with Peloton aren't trying to force you to also get one, like they are with Bitcoin. So that's another negative for Bitcoin. So that was a good discussion. So Tony, we're gonna kind of turn to you and this book you just wrote. So I'm really interested in kind of all the principles you talked about. But let me start off before we kind of get into the specifics. Why did you decide to write this book, I, Citizen? What was the impetus behind that?
Well, the simplest was my head of development, Rebecca Painter, told me I need to write a book. And so I always do what she says, right? But the reason this particular book was I was distressed, irritated, annoyed by this narrative that we hear from the left and the right, not everyone on the left and right, but too many on the left and the right, that America is divided down the middle, red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican, they hate each other, and we're on the verge of civil war. And that just didn't sound like anybody that I know. It only sounds like people in DC. And so I started going to the polling data, which is widely available to anybody. And sure enough, when you use reliable polling data versus the majority of what's out there, you find most Americans are not that ideological. They're certainly not that invested in political parties. In fact, more Americans now say they're independent than say they're Republican or Democrat. And they're very tolerant of each other. They just don't hate each other the way people in DC do. So I think that's an important point. And obviously part of your book talks about that we're not as divided as a country as you see on cable news, which I certainly agree with, like you talk about when you talk to your neighbors. But
don't you feel like sometimes people who maybe don't interact with the opposing party on a regular basis kind of the perception becomes reality where they see that on there when they don't have a Democrat doesn't have Republican friends or Republican doesn't have Democratic friends? I mean, do you think that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way?
I think that's absolutely the case, Mark. I think the more people's identity is their politics, then the less compassion they have for other people. But when you have other identities, coworker, church member, parent, neighbor, when those things are important in your life, meaning you're acting them out, right? You're living them out, then you're engaging with people across different political persuasions. But it's that roughly 20% of Americans is what the data indicates, for whom politics and their party are really, really important. And they have very little interaction with anybody from the other side, whatever that means. And the only people they do interact with from the other side are the people who are equally, right, hardcore and looking for a fight. And so they get on Facebook or Twitter and they blast away at each other, and they come to think that that's the whole country, when really it's a small minority on either side.
I wonder in that way, is there a demographic divide where you say, somebody in rural Alabama, like and maybe somebody in New York City, because you're around, 90% of people agree with you. Have you seen anything like that in your studies there?
Well, there's this interesting study that came out of University of Maryland. It was a couple, 3 years ago. And it was very fascinating. What they did was they took a big sample of congressional districts that we would call red or blue, meaning they consistently vote, Democrat for Congress or Republican for Congress. And then they sent surveys into those districts to look at the political views of the people who lived there. And they found it was over 100 issues. It was only about 3% of the issues where you could find a discernible difference, like a significant majority in a blue district that was different from a significant majority in a red district on an issue. The handful of issues where there was substantial disagreement, where you could say, aha, that's a New York liberal, or, oh, that's an Alabama conservative, were things like abortion and homosexuality. But on most issues, immigration, speech, private enterprise, whatever you want to, look at, gun rights even, there's hardly any difference between those districts. It's just that they tend to vote one way or the other because the parties give you really extreme choices. So if you're somewhat conservative, right, 20 years ago, there were times you would have voted for a Democrat because sometimes the Democratic Party would give you a somewhat conservative Democrat to vote for. Mm-hmm. Now you either get a hard left Democrat or at least a temperamentally hard right Republican. I wouldn't say they're conservative necessarily. And so you just end up voting for the same party each time. But that doesn't mean that you really embrace everything that party stands for.
That's an interesting topic. So I guess when you're talking about who this was written for, do you view this as more as kind of something written for a political crowd or people who are maybe not so political? I mean, what was kind of the target audience with this?
I started off, they say, like, for a writer, you should think about who your ideal reader is. And I didn't do that very well. I mean, I thought a lot about my mother, who was, depending on what day you caught her, was either like an anarcho-capitalist libertarian or a communitarian socialist, pro anti-big business, pro-military, but didn't want to use them. So, I always thought about her, where her big issue was with any kind of bully in any institution. And the other people in my family too. Almost everybody in my family is blue collar. I was the first person to go to college. And so I thought about them and how, the elites in this country, political elites in this country, want to leave people like my people behind or marginalize them. So I thought there's more of us than there are of them, more regular people than the political class. And so I wanted to write something that would be understandable to, interesting to, and resonate with the regular person who just wants the country to work well, who still believes in America, loves America, but is in maybe a bit of despair because of what they get inundated by in the national press.
So I guess without giving away, I mean, we want people to buy your book. And again, it's iCitizen. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Barnes & Noble. I saw it. You can get it on spn.org. What would you say? Yeah, there you go. Justin's pimping it over there. What is the kind of takeaway that you want people to get from this book? Again, don't give too much away, but if there's one thing that you're like, after reading this book, this is what I want people to understand. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of positive stuff and that shows that Americans are not nearly as divided as the political class wants to suggest. But then I talk in the middle of the book about how the underlying reality is the members of that political class, Democrats and Republicans, have systematically taken authority out of our communities and placed it in DC in the hands largely of unelected judges and bureaucrats. So that now, for every law Congress passes, federal agencies create 27 regulations that have the full force of law. So they are subverting democracy and undermining community control, right? Self-governance. So that's the danger. And along with that, we see this gradual polarization of regular people. They're buying into this myth of red versus blue and becoming radicalized, becoming the very people political class says they are. And so what I suggest in the last part of the book is there's still time if we first recognize, we have more in common with our neighbors than we've been led to believe. And if we start organizing at the local and state level, and in particular supporting state-based groups, right, like Beacon, to begin to take back not only authority from bureaucracies in our own states, but pushing back together against federal agencies. So that's the call to action for people. And so I list things that anybody can do as soon as they put the book down, after paying for it, of course, and reading it. Anyone can do to become a better citizen and retake their country.
Yeah, don't bite off Napster if you're doing that. So, and I guess the absolute last question. I think this is an interesting point of your book that's maybe different than a lot of other bestsellers, where a lot of the political books seem to have kind of a sense of pessimism or negativity. Why did you kind of went through this book with an optimistic point of view? I mean, do you think that's going to really appeal to more people? Because I think people are tired of hearing all these pessimistic, everyone hates each other, it's negative. Like, you really brought a different sense to your book. And was that intentional?
Well, I'm normally a very angry and pessimistic person. So, I don't know, maybe I watched too much Ted Lasso, but I think the country, people are so tired and they're so down, especially after what we've been through as a country for the past 2 years. And what I wanted to get across is, hey, this is a great place. And your neighbors are pretty good people. You should get to know them again. And so I ended up encouraging myself, even though I'm, preternaturally pessimistic. I kind of ended up in an optimistic place. And yeah, I feel better after writing it. So maybe that was the point behind making me write it.
Well, even if you don't sell many copies, at least like therapy, you may save some money on that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, no, I mean, so we read some of the transcripts and I actually got the online version of it, but it is absolutely worth getting, especially if you really want to kind of see America for what it is and not what, you see on cable news. It's a great buy. iCitizen, again, you can get it pretty much anywhere they sell books, it seems like. So Tony, we really, really appreciate you joining us. We had a great time talking to you, and we're excited to try some of that coffee. All right. Well, if you win the football bet, otherwise I'm going to win. I think we can all assume that. So we'll go from there. And Justin, thanks again for joining us. It's a great conversation, and we'll see you next month.